The water was already rising when Isla Bennett realized something was terribly wrong beneath the Mercer estate. It pooled around her ankles, first cold, and startling the kind of cold that did not just touch the skin, but crawled straight up the spine, as if warning that whatever was happening down here was bigger than a malfunctioning pipe. The basement floor vibrated with the faint hum of a lingering aftershock, and before she could even steady her breath, a sharp crack sounded above her, a sound like a giant piece of glass snapping under pressure. Tiny shards rained down from the ceiling, dropping into the water with soft crystalline splashes, turning the dim space into a trembling storm of sound. Elias Mercer stood only a few feet away, shoulders tense, eyes scanning the room with the rigid focus of a man whose instincts were fighting between logic and fear. The billionaire who never flinched on camera, who chose his words with surgical precision, and whose entire life was built on control, now looked like a man standing at the edge of something he had tried desperately never to relive. A file box tumbled from a shelf overhead, hitting the ground hard enough to send ripples through the rising water. One folder burst open, and pages scattered across the wet floor, spreading like pale leaves. One sheet drifted toward Ayla, and when she leaned closer, she saw a bold red stamp across the top reading "Confidential," followed by a series of financial tables and names that meant nothing to her, but clearly struck Elias like a blow. His jaw clenched, and he stepped back, as if the mere sight of it pulled him into a memory he would rather die than revisit. Isla clutched the small necklace hanging around her throat, the talisman her mother had given her. A simple silver charm, worn smooth over years of anxious fingers. Her pulse hammered, and she whispered a small, shaky prayer that no one could hear over the groan of bending metal above them. She could feel the temperature dropping the way the cold seemed to settle inside the concrete walls, as if the basement itself exhaled frost. Then the lights went out, all of them. A metallic snap cut through the darkness, and every bulb in the long corridor blinked, once then died, leaving the two of them swallowed by pitch black, except for the dim cone of Elias' flashlight, which flickered weakly without promise. The darkness was heavy, the kind that felt almost physical, and Isla drew in a sharp breath, ready to take a step, when another sound froze her in place. Elias was pushing against the steel basement door, his palms braced against the cold metal, his breath loud and harsh, but the door refused to budge. Then she noticed something else, something not from the environment, not from the storm, not from the instability of the house. His hands were shaking, not a little, not from cold, but violently from deep inside. Like his bones remembered something his mind tried to forget. Isla had seen fear before in hospitals, in shelters, in the lower-income neighborhood she grew up in. But there was something different about seeing it in someone like Elias Mercer, a man who owned buildings, whose face graced the covers of finance magazines, whose voice could tilt markets. Now he looked lost, trapped in a nightmare only he could see. Water crept higher, swirling around their calves. The concrete floor moaned again from shifting weight overhead, and Isla stepped closer, her own fear shoved aside by something instinctive and human. "Elias," she whispered, but he did not look at her. He kept pushing the door harder, until his shoulder slammed into it, but the steel did not move. His breath came in short bursts, too fast, too uneven. The flashlight flickered again, threatening to die completely. Without thinking, Isla reached out and pressed her hand to his cheek. His skin was cold, but not freezing, and beneath her fingers, she felt the tremor, the rapid pulse, the panic. She said softly, "You are shaking, but it is not the cold, is it?" The moment her touch settled, his eyes snapped toward hers, and in that flickering half-light, she finally saw it, the depth of old trauma, swelling up like a wave he could not outrun. A flashback. The world around them trembled. A distant rumble shivered through the floor, and something heavy toppled in the far end of the basement, sending a thunderous echo through the dark. A new leak burst from a cracked pipe overhead, releasing a thin spray of icy water that misted down around them. Isla squeezed his cheek, gently grounding him. "The basement is flooding," she murmured, voice thin but steady. Elias blinked as if trying to pull himself into the present. He swallowed hard, jaw-tight breath, visibly forcing itself into rhythm. The flashlight pulsed once, twice, then dimmed further, painting them both in a trembling halo of weak yellow light. Their faces were inches apart, shadows cutting across features, making everything sharp and intimate. Isla could hear her heartbeat and his, and the relentless drip of water hitting concrete. A piercing crack sparked through the ceiling again, and another shower of glass hissed downward. Isla flinched but kept her hand on him, refusing to pull away. Elias whispered something, but the sound barely existed. His breath hit the air in pale clouds. The cold was swallowing the room inch by inch. The rising water was already climbing above their ankles, chilling their legs until skin went numb. Something inside Isla tightened, a quiet fear, mixing with a strange, profound awareness of the moment of the man in front of her, of the danger closing in on all sides. The flashlight dimmed again until their world shrank into a soft, trembling glow, barely enough to outline their silhouettes. She stared at Elias, feeling his shaking ease just slightly under her touch. Then in a voice thin as a thread, she whispered the words that had been sitting on the edge of her lips, fighting to come out. "Can I get under your blanket?" "I'm freezing." The sentence hung between them, soft, fragile, real. Elias froze, eyes locked on hers, as if those few words pulled him fully out of his flashback. His chest rose, then fell slowly, painfully, consciously. The water crept higher, the darkness pressed closer, and the moment her voice faded, the scene snapped back to earlier that evening, to the moment everything had begun, hours before. The basement drowned in darkness and panic. Elias Mercer had been standing in the grand main hall of the Mercer estate, surrounded by florists, decorators, and staff rushing to prepare for the high-profile fundraising gala scheduled for the following night. The chandeliers glittered like suspended constellations above him, casting sharp white light across marble floors polished to a mirror finish. Outside, the California evening glowed golden and calm, offering no hint of the tremors that would shake the estate later. Elias had returned home early from a round of high-stake board meetings, the kind that filled headlines and fueled gossip blogs about his cold precision and ruthless intelligence. At 38, he was the unattainable billionaire bachelor, the man who dated models for exactly 3 months, and whose life was rumored to be too structured, too wounded, too untouchable for real intimacy. His suit jacket hung over one arm sleeves of his crisp shirt, rolled to his elbows, exposing the faint scars on his forearm. Scars no one ever asked him about, scars he never explained. He walked through the hall, issuing instructions with the quiet authority that made even seasoned event coordinators straighten their posture. His voice was low, calm, sharp, every syllable measured like a scalpel. On the opposite side of the room, barely noticed by anyone, Isla Bennett hurried through her shift, wiping down tables, collecting discarded packing paper, and maneuvering around towering floral arrangements with the grace of someone used to working unseen. At 24, she was invisible in places like this. To the wealthy staff, she was simply background motion, a girl in a faded uniform, her hair pulled back, neatly, her hands small and quick as she worked. She kept her talisman necklace tucked under her collar, a habit formed from years of trying not to draw attention. One night she had been called in for an extra shift because half the housekeeping team had phoned out, exhausted from double shifts in preparation for the gala. She did not complain. Every extra hour meant another bill, paid another treatment her mother could afford. Isla moved toward the catering prep area, carrying a tray of empty glasses balanced skillfully on one hand. She glanced up just long enough to see the glittering hall, and for a brief, aching second, she wondered what it would feel like to belong somewhere that sparkled like this. Then her foot caught the edge of a floral crate she had not seen. The tray rocked, glasses toppled. The sound of shattering crystal exploded across the hall. Staff gasped. The air seemed to freeze. Isla froze too, heart dropping to her stomach, every muscle tightening with dread. She crouched quickly, muttering apologies to no one in particular, hands trembling as she gathered shards. Before she could finish, a pair of polished black dress shoes stepped into her field of vision. She looked up. Elias Mercer was standing directly in front of her, tall, sharp jaw, cold eyes studying her with an unreadable expression. For a moment, Isla felt as though she could not breathe. She braced for reprimand, or for him to call security, or for him to simply turn away in silent disdain like wealthy men often did when someone from her world made mistakes in theirs. But he did not do any of those things. Instead, he crouched down slowly, picking up a larger piece of glass with careful precision. His voice was quiet, almost too gentle compared to the image the world held of him when he said, "You are going to cut yourself doing that." Isla blinked, stunned by the softness in his tone. "I am sorry, sir. I was not looking. I will clean it," she said quickly, tucking her hair behind her ear, hands shaking. Elias handed her the shard, then said, "No need to apologize. It happens." The staff exchanged confused glances, some whispering to each other, because Elias Mercer did not apologize to anyone, and he certainly did not comfort employees who dropped things. Isla kept her gaze low, trying to finish as fast as possible. But as she reached for another piece of glass, her fingers brushed his. Not enough to count as a touch, but enough to create a tiny spark of awareness. Elias paused, studying her. "Isla Bennett," he said, reading her name tag. "New to the evening shift." "Yes, sir, just filling in," she replied. He nodded, filed the information away. In his mind, then stood. For a moment she thought that would be the end of it. But hours later, fate would push their paths together again, in a way neither could have predicted. As the staff cleaned up the last remnants of the spill, a sudden alarm chimed from the mansion intercom, a low monotone warning that indicated a power fluctuation somewhere in the estate. Technicians murmured to each other, radioing the electrical team. Elias turned sharply toward the sound tension flickering across his features. A power surge tonight was not just inconvenient, it was dangerous. Isla stepped toward the hall exit to return to her duties when a supervisor called out, "Bennett, go with Mr. Mercer." He needs someone familiar with the logistics floor plans. Her stomach lurched. Go where? The basement, came the reply. She froze. The basement of the Mercer estate was enormous, layered with old storage rooms, mechanical spaces, and long-forgotten sections from the original construction decades ago. Employees avoided it when they could. Elias was already striding toward the lower-level access door, expecting her to follow. Isla swallowed hard, adjusted her small flashlight, and obeyed. Neither knew that the short walk down the service stairs would become the turning point of their lives. The staircase leading to the lower levels of the Mercer estate was nothing like the marble grandeur above. It was narrow, utilitarian, and dimly lit by a single flickering bulb that hummed with an almost irritated persistence. Each step echoed sharply as Isla Bennett followed a few careful paces behind Elias Mercer, her small flashlight casting a faint circle of light along the concrete walls. The air grew cooler with every descent, and for a brief moment, Isla wondered why a billionaire would ever bother personally inspecting anything in a basement this large. She soon learned why. As they reached the landing, a second alarm pulsed through the overhead speakers, a neutral monotone voice announcing power surge. Detected in lower ground electrical room. Technicians, please report immediately. Isla tightened her grip on the flashlight. Elias turned slightly toward her and asked, You know the layout down here? She nodded once. I ran deliveries last month during the renovation. It is a bit like a maze, though. I will guide you. He nodded without hesitation, trusting her more than the bustling supervisors upstairs, who had no idea how sprawling the basement truly was. Isla stepped ahead and motioned him to follow her down the long concrete corridor. The hall lights flickered, casting strange shadows that stretched and collapsed with each surge. A low rumble of machinery echoed from somewhere deep within the estate, adding a steady vibration beneath their feet. Isla cleared her throat, keeping her voice steady. The electrical room should be straight ahead, past the old storage wing. Just do not turn left at the fork. That part of the basement is sealed off and... She hesitated, and what he asked, it is just what people say. That section flooded years ago during a mountain runoff. They never fully repaired it. It is unstable. Elias slowed his stride, eyes hardening in a way she could not decipher. His voice dropped into a quiet edge. That part should have been locked permanently. Isla swallowed, sensing a shift not in the air, but in him, as though she had brushed against something invisible and painful. They continued walking until the corridor opened into a wider hallway lined with metal doors. Some bore labels like Archive Supply Storage and Utility 2B. Isla led Elias toward the far door marked Main Electrical in faded blue stencil. She reached for the handle, but Elias stopped her hand with a firm touch. Do not open it yet. His voice was calm, but beneath the calmness lurked tension. He scanned the metal floor near the door, then lifted a small grated vent with one hand. Isla watched confusion, knitting her brow. What are you looking for? He did not look at her. Signs of residual heat or burnt wiring. If the surge was strong enough, it could have ignited something. The gesture looked oddly practiced, and Isla realized this was not the first time Elias had inspected something like this himself. The thought stuck with her as she entered the electrical room ahead of him. Rows of circuit breakers lined the walls, each with carefully labeled switches. But the moment they stepped inside, Isla sensed the temperature drop again, as if cold air seeped through cracks in the walls. Elias moved directly to the breaker panel the largest one in the room, its metal casing dented from age. His eyes narrowed. The reading on the voltmeter was higher than expected. Someone overloaded the system, he muttered. Not a fault. Someone. Isla blinked. Who would do that? Elias exhaled sharply, standing straighter and wiping dust from the panel. This house stores millions of dollars in archived contracts. A timed power surge could corrupt digital backups, fry old servers, or erase entire paper trails. Isla stared at him, realization slowly spreading. That sounds like sabotage. He did not answer immediately, but the silence was enough. Suddenly, a distant metallic groan vibrated through the ceiling above them, like something heavy shifting under strain. Isla's instinct kicked in, and she moved closer to Elias. Was that normal? No. His voice was tight, controlled. Something is wrong with the foundation. We need to finish quickly and leave. Isla directed her flashlight toward the far corner and gasped. A hairline crack had formed across the ceiling. Concrete dust drifting down in soft gray wisps. Elias followed her gaze, his jaw clenching. Come on. The breaker room connects to the monitoring hub through that passageway. We will check for additional faults, then get out of here. They entered a narrower corridor, lit only by Isla's flashlight. Old metal pipes lined the ceiling, some rusted, others hissing faintly with steam. Moisture clung to the walls and dripped steadily into shallow puddles on the floor. Isla spoke softly, almost as if afraid the basement itself might hear. Sir, do you come down here often? No. His answer came too fast, too sharp. He paused, inhaling once, letting the air steady him, before adding, I avoid it when I can. Isla did not press, but her curiosity sharpened. Moments later, they reached another intersection where the corridor split in two. Isla pointed right. The hub is this way. Whatever you do, do not go left. It is the flooded wing. The door is rusted shut. Elias stared down the left corridor. A breeze of cold, damp air seeped from it, carrying the faint scent of mold and something metallic. His expression darkened, and Isla saw something flicker through him, something haunted. Sir, she said quietly, what happened down there? He did not answer her. Instead, he turned away abruptly, his voice low and clipped. It is not important. Let us keep moving. Even as he said it, Isla noticed his breathing had changed slightly, too controlled, too measured. The silence grew heavy between them, not awkward, but charged with something unspoken. Minutes later, they reached the monitoring hub, a small room filled with outdated control panels, humming under layers of dust. But before Elias could inspect the equipment, a deep resonant shudder rattled the floor. Isla stumbled against him, catching herself on his arm. The ground stilled for a moment, and she whispered, that feeling. Was that an aftershock? Yes. His eyes scanned the ceiling, his hand steadying her elbow. We need to get out now. Isla nodded quickly, stepping back into the hall ahead of him. But the moment she grabbed the door handle, a violent tremor surged through the foundation, stronger than the last. The overhead pipes groaned. The emergency lights flickered. And in that split second, Elias remembered. The fire, the smoke, the ceiling collapsing on his younger brother's final scream. His heart slammed against his ribs, old terror clawing its way through him, as Isla gasped under the rain of dust and debris. And without knowing it, they had just crossed into the part of the basement he swore never to enter again. The tremor hit before Isla could even process the warning signs. One moment she was gripping the cold metal door handle, preparing to lead Elias back toward the stairs, and the next the entire basement lurched sideways, as if the concrete beneath them had suddenly turned to liquid. The lights overhead flickered violently, bathing the corridor in jagged bursts of red and white, before cutting out entirely and plunging everything into a suffocating darkness, broken only by the narrow beam of her trembling flashlight. A thunderous crack split through the ceiling like lightning striking stone. Isla cried out instinctively, throwing her arms over her head as chunks of plaster and dust rained down. Elias grabbed her waist, pulling her against him, with the reflexes of someone who had lived through collapse before. He shielded her body with his own, bracing them both against the wall until the first shock passed. But the ground did not settle. A deeper groan echoed through the foundation, an unsettling vibration that crawled up their legs and into their bones. The entire structure felt as though it was exhaling under pressure, old beams shifting, grinding, tightening with age. Elias's breath quickened almost imperceptibly, but Isla felt it where his chest pressed against her back. As the air filled with chalky dust, her flashlight beam jittered across the hall landing, finally on a massive steel support bracket directly above the door they had come through. The metal plate buckled with a slow, sickening bend, the bolts screeching under strain. Isla shouted, "Move," but the warning came too late. The steel beam dropped from the ceiling, slamming into the concrete floor with a deafening crash and striking the basement access door with enough force to twist the hinges. A sharp gust of cold air burst outward from the impact as the entire doorway gave way, collapsing inward like a crushed tin can. The only exit had been sealed shut by hundreds of pounds of metal and broken concrete. Isla's heartbeat roared in her ears as she stumbled back from the dust cloud, coughing hard. When she turned around, Elias was already testing the door, pushing his shoulder against it, bracing his feet, and attempting to shove it open. The steel did not even tremble. He tried again, harder this time, his muscles straining under his shirt, the tendons in his arms flexing with desperate force. But the door remained unmoved. His breath came faster and faster in sharp, uneven bursts. Isla lifted her light and shone it across the floor. Water was pooling from the ruptured pipe behind the wall, not just dripping, but pouring in a thin, steady stream. It spread fast across the ground, shimmering under the flashlight like rippling mercury. "We need to move away from this section," she said, voice tight. "The crack in the concrete is widening." Elias did not answer. His fists remained pressed against the steel, his forehead leaning on the cold surface, as if he could mentally force the world to undo what it had just done. Isla stepped toward him, unsure whether to call his name again, when a faint splintering sound came from overhead. Her eyes darted up. Another pane of glass from the basement's old ventilation skylight had fractured. She saw the structural tension collect like the inhale before a scream, and she lunged forward, pulling Elias back just as the glass shattered, sending a rain of razor-sharp fragments clattering to the ground where he had been standing moments before. The sound echoed like breaking ice. Elias blinked hard, clearly dragged back, into the present by the near miss. Isla steadied him. "That could have hit you." He stared at her with eyes that looked both haunted and painfully aware. His voice came out hoarse. "We need to get to the secondary hallway now." Isla nodded and guided him quickly, down the corridor, shifting through the rising water. It had already reached the tops of their shoes, cold enough to sting. The aftershock had knocked several shelves loose, leaving their contents strewn across the hallway floor. Plastic containers floated aimlessly, knocking against Isla's ankles as they moved through the mess. Another rumble rolled through the basement, shorter but close enough to shake loose more dust. Elias stopped briefly, pressing his palm to the wall, his breath too fast. Isla turned her light toward him, eyes widening. His hand was trembling again, that same uncontrolled shake she had felt earlier, only worse this time. She touched his arm gently. "Are you all right?" His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. She saw it clearly now, the way his pupils sharpened, then darkened the way his chest rose too quickly, the way his lips parted in shallow breaths. "Sir," she whispered, "you are having a flashback again, aren't you?" He remained frozen, unable to deny it. The emergency lights along the wall flickered back on for a moment, casting a red glow across Elias's face. In the crimson light, Isla could see the boy. He must have been the night of the fire, scared, trapped, helpless, watching flames or ceiling or smoke swallow someone he loved. Elias pressed his hand to his forehead. "We have to keep moving," he managed, but the words were tight as piano wire. Isla took his other hand without thinking, grounding him with warmth. "Come with me. Stay with my voice. Look at the light. One step at a time." He inhaled shaky, but followed her as she pulled him toward the safety of the wider chamber ahead. When they reached it, the water was deeper, swirling around their ankles with a cold that pierced skin. Overhead, another creak rang out, another warning that this basement was no longer structurally sound. Elias wiped dust from his face, regaining enough composure to search for another exit. Isla scanned the room, lifting the light toward the shadows, but all she saw was storage equipment, old shelves, and the faintest outline of a ventilation shaft far above their heads. No stairs, no ladder, no access. The basement had become a trap. Isla felt her throat tighten as the air grew colder and the darkness pressed in from all sides. When the ground settled again, she looked at Elias and whispered in a voice smaller than she meant it to be, "What do we do now?" His answer came slowly, carved from fear and resolve in equal measure. "We survive, Isla. We survive until someone finds us." The floor shuddered once more, and the basement swallowed their words into the dark. The cold settled into the basement like an unwelcome presence, a living thing that crept across the concrete and wrapped itself around their legs as the water continued to rise. It was no longer merely uncomfortable. It was biting, numbing, the kind of cold that pushed past skin and sank deep into muscle and bone. Isla Bennett felt it, first in her toes, then in her calves, where the icy water sloshed with every cautious step she took. Her breath puffed visibly into the air, a thin cloud dissolving almost as quickly as it formed. She tightened her grip on the small flashlight, but its beam shook with her trembling hand. Elias Mercer scanned the dim space for anything they could use. A lantern, a tarp, even an old maintenance coat. But the basement seemed determined to offer them nothing except a few rusted tools and crates half submerged. The emergency lights, which had flickered earlier, were gone now, leaving only Isla's flashlight and the faint red glow from a dying exit sign across the hall. Isla rubbed her arms briskly, trying to stay warm. The dampness in the air dipped into her uniform, making the thin cotton cling uncomfortably to her skin. She tried to keep her teeth from chattering, but every inhale shivered through her like a warning. Elias finally found a stack of maintenance supplies shoved against the far wall. He dug through boxes, his movements urgent, controlled, but tinged with the impatience of a man who knew time was turning against them. At last he pulled free 2 blankets, old dusty, smelling faintly of mildew but intact. "These will have to do," he said, voice low and composed, though Isla noticed the faint tremor beneath it. She nodded, accepting one blanket as he shook the dust off the other. He draped his around his shoulders with minimal fuss, but Isla hesitated. Even as she wrapped it around herself, the thin fiber barely held back the chill. Her fingers were already numb at the tips. The water had risen again, creeping above their shins. Isla hugged the blanket tighter around her body. Every few seconds her breath hitched involuntarily. Elias shot a glance at her. "Are you all right?" She nodded quickly, though the trembling in her voice betrayed her. "I am fine, just cold." He studied her a moment longer before turning away, as if forcing himself to focus on their situation. He moved toward the nearest wall, pressing his palm to the concrete, feeling for vibration, listening for signs of further structural weakening. Another tremor could drop the ceiling on them both. Isla watched him, scanning every detail of his posture. His shoulders were tense, the muscles along his jaw tight. He looked like a man fighting a war on more than one front. The external danger and something internal, something destructive that clawed at him from memory. A soft clatter echoed behind them, and Isla nearly jumped out of her skin, but it was only the metal tool rack shifting as more water pooled beneath it. She forced herself to breathe slowly. Her mother had always told her that fear grows louder in enclosed spaces, and Isla could feel that truth pressing in on her from all sides. Elias suddenly straightened, inhaling sharply. Isla moved toward him, quickly, concerned. "What is it?" He held up his hand, signaling her to pause, then pointed toward a darkened corner where water trickled from a cracked pipe. The leak was widening, sending colder air swirling through the room. "We need to keep moving, or we are going to lose body heat faster than we can manage," he said. Isla nodded, though moving through the freezing water felt like wading through liquid ice. She stepped forward, but her vision tilted slightly, and she stumbled, catching herself on a metal shelf. Elias was at her side in an instant, his hand steadying her elbow. "Isla, you are losing heat too fast." His voice had shifted from controlled neutrality to something sharper, almost alarmed. She forced a weak smile. "I am okay, just slipped." But she had not slipped. Her muscles were tightening from the cold, and a dull ache pulsed along her limbs. Elias must have known, because he gently turned her to face him, examining her pallor. "Your lips are blue," he said quietly. Isla touched her mouth, startled by how numb it felt. She tried to speak, but her voice quivered. "It is just the water, sir. I will adjust." Elias's expression hardened. "No, you will not. Hypothermia does not wait for people to adjust." His hands tightened briefly on her arms, as if grounding both of them in this reality. Isla wanted to tell him she could handle it, that she had endured colder nights in cheap apartments with broken heaters. But the truth was, her legs were shaking uncontrollably. Her body was losing warmth faster than she could will herself to keep it. Elias stepped back, scanning the room again for any heat source, any insulation, anything at all. Then it happened. A hollow metallic boom rang through the corridor behind them, followed by a deeper vibration. The sound shot straight through Elias like a blade. His breath-faltered shoulders stiffening as the color drained from his face. Isla recognized the signs instantly. Another flashback. She moved toward him slowly, careful not to startle him. "Elias, are you still here with me?" His eyes were unfocused, locked on some invisible memory. Smoke, screaming, a ceiling collapsing, a fire that swallowed his brother. Isla touched his cheek, gently, the cold of her hand, contrasting the feverish tension in his jaw. "Hey, look at me. You are not there, you are here in the basement with me." The small quiver in her voice was steadying rather than weak. Slowly, painfully, his gaze shifted back to her. His breathing was still uneven, but present. He blinked once, twice, grounding himself. Isla's hand slid down from his cheek to rest lightly against his wrist. His pulse was frantic beneath her fingers. She kept her touch gentle. "You are shaking," she whispered. "Not because of the cold." He closed his eyes for a moment, jaw clenched. "The cold is not the only thing in this basement," he said quietly. It was the closest he had come to describing the trauma gnawing at him. Isla nodded, understanding more in his silence than in any explanation words could have offered. The water rose another inch, swirling around their legs, and Isla shivered violently. Elias opened his eyes again, and something in his expression shifted from panic to fierce resolve. He stepped closer, lifting the blanket from his shoulders and wrapping it over hers without hesitation. She protested weakly. "Sir, you need that too." He shook his head. "I will manage. You will not." Isla felt warmth radiate through the blanket, subtle but immediate. Elias hesitated only a moment before saying, "Isla, stay close until the shaking stops." Her breath caught, and for a second she did not move, unsure if she read him right. Then another ripple of cold stabbed through her body. She took one small step closer. The basement groaned around them, and the dark pressed heavier, but for the first moment since the collapse, Arila felt something other than fear. She felt him standing with her, holding her steady, against the cold beneath the mansion. The cold deepened until it felt almost sentient, weaving through the basement corridors, with a cruel patience that made Isla Bennett's teeth clatter uncontrollably. Her legs trembled beneath the soaked uniform clinging to her skin, and her breath escaped in uneven puffs that looked as fragile as smoke. Every shiver stabbed deeper than the last, and she could feel her body drifting toward that strange, heavy numbness she recognized from warnings about hypothermia, the kind that tricked people into thinking they were warmer than they were just before they collapsed. Elias Mercer watched her closely, even as he fought his own inner battle. His breaths were still uneven, his jaw ticking with every muffled groan of the structure above them. But he had steadied enough to understand the danger rising around them. He stepped closer, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders, fingers brushing the ends of her damp hair. The contact was fleeting, but grounding a silent insistence that she stay conscious. Isla's vision flickered for a moment as dizziness washed through her. Elias caught her elbow, guiding her toward the driest corner he could find, though the water still pooled around their ankles, icy and relentless. Isla leaned against the wall, her legs barely cooperating. Her voice, when she spoke, came out thin. "I am okay, just need a minute." "You are not okay," he said quietly but firmly. "Your pulse is slowing." Isla tried to laugh, but it emerged as a weak exhale. "I do not think billionaires are supposed to know how fast a maid's pulse should be." His expression softened with something she had never seen in his eyes before. Something unguarded, I know because it is getting dangerously faint. Her gaze drifted down, confused. My pulse is faint. Elias nodded once and lowered himself to crouch in front of her, his face illuminated faintly by the dying glow of the exit sign behind him. He reached for her wrist again, but his fingers hesitated. The moment before, he touched her skin, as if afraid his own cold hands would worsen hers. Isla met his gaze, and the world around them seemed to shrink to the small, trembling circle of light where only their breaths mingled. The water rose again, swirling around his boots and licking at her calves. Her body jolted from the shock of it. She whispered, "Elias, I cannot stop shaking." His eyes darkened with determination and fear battling side by side. "You are losing heat too fast. We need to share warmth, or you are going to pass out." Isla blinked a few times, trying to process through the cotton-heavy haze in her mind. Her lips parted, her breath stuttering, and when the next tremor of cold racked her body, she could not stop herself. The words slipped out raw and unfiltered, shaped by need more than logic. "Can I get under your blanket?" The moment hung between them, suspended in the cold, tinged air like a fragile secret. She swallowed hard, steadying herself against the wall as her voice thinned to a whisper, dripping with fear rather than boldness. "Please, I am freezing." Elias did not move at first, not because he was shocked and not because he misunderstood. He hesitated because he could feel the weight of the moment, the intimacy laced so tightly into survival that he feared crossing some invisible line. But then Isla's knees buckled slightly, and he reacted without thinking. "Of course," he murmured, opening the blanket wide with steady, deliberate hands. "Come here, Isla." She stepped forward with trembling hesitation. The blanket engulfed both of them as she pressed into the shelter of his warmth. Elias wrapped his arms around her, pulling her closer, until her forehead rested against his chest. Her breath hitched at the sudden contrast of heat, his body radiating enough warmth to melt the numbness creeping into her limbs. Her fingers curled lightly into his shirt, catching the faint scent of cedar and cold air clinging to him. He adjusted the blanket around them, sealing out as much of the draft as he could. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Isla could feel the steady beat of his heart against her cheek, a grounding rhythm that replaced the frantic noise in her head. Slowly, her trembling eased, though the cold still lingered deep inside like a stubborn shadow. She lifted her head slightly, not enough to break the closeness, just enough to meet his eyes. "I am sorry," she whispered, unsure why she felt the need to apologize. Elias's expression softened almost painfully. "Do not apologize. You are freezing. That is all that matters." Isla nodded, small movements barely perceptible. Her necklace, the silver talisman her mother had given her, pressed against his chest through his shirt, cold at first, then warming between them. Elias's gaze dropped briefly to where the charm rested, and something changed in his expression, as if he understood how personal the gesture was, that she trusted him enough to let her most cherished thing rest against him. He lifted one hand, gently pressing it over hers, and the necklace together, a quiet moment of connection. The basement groaned again faintly, but neither flinched this time. Elias whispered softly, "Stay awake, Isla. Talk to me. Tell me something." Her voice broke slightly, but warmth had returned to it. "What should I say?" He exhaled slowly, his breath brushing her hair. "Say whatever keeps you here." She let a small shiver run through her as she whispered, "Then do not let go." "I am not letting go." He answered, his arms tightening slightly around her, as the cold clawed at the edges of their fragile warmth. And in that dark frozen basement with the water rising and the world above unaware, something delicate and undeniably real formed between them, the kind of connection forged not by romance, but survival and truth. For a long time they stayed wrapped beneath the blanket, in a small, trembling circle of warmth, while the rest of the basement shifted, groaned, and whispered around them. The cold still lingered on Isla Bennett's skin, but the violent shaking had softened, replaced by a deep bone ache that told her she was not safe yet. Her cheek rested against Elias Mercer's chest, his heart beating in a steady thrum she clung to like a lifeline. She felt every inhale he took, every quiet, controlled exhale he forced to keep himself grounded. It was strange, she thought, how someone so powerful could look both indestructible and breakable at the same time. Stranger still that she was the one holding him together just as he was holding her. After several minutes, Isla lifted her head slightly enough to see his face in the dim red glow of the exit sign. The shadows played across his features, sharpening his jaw, softening his eyes. His expression was calm on the surface, but tension sat beneath it, subtle but unmistakable. "Are you warmer?" he asked, voice low, steady. A little, she whispered, though her voice still trembled. "But you are shaking too." Elias looked away for a moment, jaw flexing. "It is not the cold." Isla pressed her lips together. She had known. She felt it in the way his breath hitched each time the building creaked, the way he froze when dust rained from the ceiling. She sensed it in the grip of his hand earlier when the tremor hit. But she had waited for him to say it. The basement water rippled softly around their shoes, a quiet reminder that they were still trapped, still in danger, still fighting time. Isla shifted slightly under the blanket, adjusting so she could see him more clearly. "Elias," she murmured gently, grounding him with her voice. "What happened to you down here in this part of the mansion?" At first he did not speak. His throat tightened visibly. He swallowed hard, but the motion looked painful. His breath hitched again, but not from fear of the cold. Years of silence, years of burying something deep inside, held him still. Isla sensed the war inside him, the instinct to shut down, to deflect, to hide. But trauma had a sound, and she could hear it in the quiet between them. Her hand slid carefully to his wrist fingers, gentle over the racing pulse there. "You do not have to tell me," she whispered, "not if it hurts too much." Her softness broke something open. Elias exhaled shakily, resting the back of his head against the cold concrete wall, eyes drifting somewhere far beyond the basement, beyond the present. "I was 14, he began, voice hollow. Isla stilled her breathing. He continued slowly, as if every sentence had to fight its way out. There was a fire in the old part of the estate. Not this basement, but one level above. An electrical fault. Or so they said. His jaw clenched. My younger brother Mason was trapped inside. She felt his breath falter again, the tremor returning in his fingers. I tried to reach him, I tried. But the smoke was too thick. The beams collapsed. 1 second he was screaming, and the next, he choked on the silence that followed. Isla's heart tightened painfully. "I am so sorry," she whispered, her hand instinctively lifting to rest against his chest, over the beat of his heart, the only thing grounding him to the present. Elias closed his eyes. After that, I could not go near basements or collapsed spaces, or anything that sounded like steel falling. When the tremor hit earlier, he shuddered, breath stammering. All I saw was that night again. Isla leaned closer, her forehead almost touching his. "You were a child," she said softly. "You could not have saved him." He shook his head, a slow, stubborn motion, weighted with guilt. "I was the older brother. It was my job." Isla's hand tightened slightly against his chest, grounding him. "You cannot carry the weight of a tragedy you did not cause," she murmured. "Sometimes things happen because the world is cruel, not because you failed." Elias breathed unevenly, absorbing her words like someone who had never been offered that kind of compassion before. The cold air swirled around them, the basement groaned, but for a moment, none of it felt as loud as the silence he had carried for decades. After several breaths, he looked at her again, eyes darker but clearer, as if confessing had thawed something frozen deep inside him. "And you," he asked, his voice gentler than she had ever heard. "You speak like someone who understands loss." Isla hesitated. Her gaze drifted downward toward the necklace tucked beneath the blanket. Her fingers brushed the charm. "This," she said quietly, lifting the silver talisman so it hung between them, "belonged to my mother." Elias's eyes softened. "She was sick," Isla continued, voice wavering. "For years. I worked nights, days, anything I could do to keep her treatments going. I wanted to study nursing, but tuition was too much. So I took cleaning jobs, the kind that paid under the table and never asked questions." She offered a small, sad laugh. "You would be surprised how invisible you become when you clean the spaces where powerful people live." Elias's gaze did not leave her face. "Nothing about you is invisible, Isla." Her breath faltered at the honesty in his tone. She looked away momentarily, overwhelmed, then continued quietly. "My mother passed last year. All she left me was this necklace. She said it would protect me. But most days I think I wear it, so I do not forget her." Elias lifted his hand, slowly giving her time to pull away. When she did not, he brushed his fingers against the charm resting over her heart. The gesture was small, but intimate, more intimate than she expected from a man like him. He lowered his hand only to take her cold fingers lightly between his warm ones. "You protected her longer than most," he said quietly. Isla swallowed hard emotion, rising in her chest. "You do not know that. I know strength when I see it," he replied. "And you have more than you realize." The blanket shifted slightly as they leaned closer for warmth. Two lives that never should have touched, woven tightly now by shared fear and shared memory. The basement water lapped softly at their ankles, the cold still haunting, but less powerful than the truths they had just spoken. Isla exhaled slowly. "I guess we both have ghosts." Elias nodded, and tonight they finally stopped hiding. She rested her head against his shoulder again, her body curling instinctively toward warmth human, not just physical. Elias closed the blanket tighter around them both, gaze softening into something unguarded, something raw, something real. And in that trembling basement where water rose, and memories threatened to drown them both, they found something neither expected to feel in a place meant only for fear. They found understanding, the kind that binds two people together long before either realizes it. The dim red glow of the exit sign pulsed slowly, like a fading heartbeat, casting the basement in waves of shadow. Isla Bennett pulled the blanket tighter around herself and Elias as the cold crept higher the water, now swirling around their calves. With an icy insistence that numbed everything it touched, the air smelled of metal and mildew and something older, like the forgotten breath of the mansion's buried past. Every sound echoed the steady drip of leaking pipes. the faint groan of shifting beams, and the quiet rhythmic crackling of the broken electrical panel, sparking intermittently somewhere beyond the darkness. Isla had no idea how long they had been trapped, but she could feel time slipping by in the heaviness of her limbs. The warmth she had found against Elias's body was fragile, constantly threatened by the rising water and the cold. Elias shifted slightly, adjusting the blanket to shield her better. His movements were careful, precise, as though he feared that if he made one wrong motion, the world around them might collapse even further. Isla pressed closer, trying to absorb as much warmth as she could. Beneath her palm, his heartbeat was steady, but faster than normal, betraying the storm inside him. Another tremor shivered through the floor, a low vibration that made the water ripple in concentric circles. Elias stiffened instantly, his breath catching in his throat. Isla felt the change like a snap. His muscles locked, his hands curled slightly, his body braced as if awaiting impact. She lifted her head just enough to look at him. "Elias, you are here with me, remember? Not there, not then." But his gaze had already drifted somewhere she could not follow, somewhere trapped between memory and fear. The ceiling above them creaked a moan of weakened beams, and Elias flinched violently, shoulders jerking the blanket, slipping from one side. Isla caught it quickly and pulled it back around them, but the tremor had done more than shake the blanket loose. It had cracked open his composure. His breath grew rapid, uneven, shallow. "Elias," she whispered gently, cupping his jaw with her cold hand, grounding him, forcing his eyes to come back to her. "Look at me." Slowly, painfully he did. His pupils were dilated, his expression scattered like fragments of a man who had spent years burying his terror under layers of power, wealth, and silence. Isla leaned closer, her voice soft but firm. "What do you hear?" He swallowed hard, but the words fought him. "Not this basement," he managed, finally voice-strained. "Then where?" Elias's jaw clenched, the muscles twitching. "The fire," he choked out. "Smoke everywhere. The ceiling giving out. Masons screaming for me to come back." Isla felt his whole body tremble, not from cold, but from fear so deep, so rooted it had carved itself into him. She moved her hand from his cheek to the back of his neck, her thumb gently stroking the tense line of muscle there. "Elias, breathe with me," she whispered, "in and out. Listen to my voice. You are not there. You are here." His breathing hitched again, and Isla realized she needed to pull him back into the present, not with logic, but with sensation, with presence, with something real to anchor him. She lifted his hand, placing it against her cheek, letting him feel the warmth returning to her skin. "Feel this," she murmured. "Feel me. You are not alone this time." Slowly his fingers curled against her skin, and she felt the tremors in them begin to ease. He closed his eyes, breathing her in, grounding himself. The water sloshed softly around them, a painfully cold reminder of the present moment. When he opened his eyes again, he looked more stable, still shaken, but anchored. Isla let out a breath she did not realize she had been holding. "You keep saving me," he whispered, voice quieter than she had ever heard. Isla offered a small, tired smile. "We are saving each other." Another metallic pop echoed through the basement, startling them both. The overhead pipe that had been leaking earlier now bulged ominously, droplets of water gathering along its length. Isla pointed at it instinctively. "Elias, that does not look good." Before he could respond, the pipe gave way, with a sharp explosive burst showering the room in a cold curtain of water. Isla shrieked as the wave hit her body, soaking what little dry warmth she had left. The blanket clung to her, instantly drenched. Elias grabbed her waist, pulling her back from the strongest spray, but the damage was already done. The temperature plummeted, and the water level surged upward with alarming speed. Isla shuddered violently, teeth chattering so hard she could barely inhale. Elias held her tighter, bringing the blanket around them, though it was dripping wet, barely offering any protection now. Isla's voice trembled uncontrollably. "Elias, it is too cold. I cannot feel my hands." He pressed her closer into his chest, rubbing her arms briskly, trying to generate friction. "Stay awake, Isla. Stay with me." She whimpered softly, the sound barely audible over the dripping water and the groaning pipes. Her pulse fluttered weakly when he touched her wrist again. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath, urgency slicing through his tone. He looked around the basement, searching for a higher platform, any place to escape the rising water. His eyes landed on a maintenance shelf secured to the wall a foot above the waterline. "We need to get off the floor," he said. Isla nodded weakly, but when she tried to stand, her knees buckled. Elias caught her, immediately lifting her with a strength that surprised her. He guided her toward the shelf, supporting most of her weight as she clung to him. They managed to climb onto the metal platform just as the water rose, another inch swirling darkly, where they had been seconds before. Isla collapsed against him, chest-heaving eyes fluttering. Elias wrapped the soaked blanket around them again, gathering her practically into his lap to keep her body pressed against his. Isla's lips trembled as she whispered, "I am scared." He rested his forehead against hers, his voice rough but steady. "I know, but you are not dying here, not tonight, not with me." The basement rumbled again faintly, but Elias held her tighter, grounding her in the present, shielding her from both the cold and the ghosts clawing at the edges of his mind. And in that trembling, flooded room, surrounded by fear and memory, they clung to each other like two souls refusing to drown. The metal shelf groaned beneath their combined weight, but it held just high enough to keep their bodies out of the rising water that swirled below in dark, restless currents. Isla Bennett clung to Elias Mercer, her breath unsteady, fogging against his throat as the soaked blanket wrapped around them dripped steadily onto the platform. Every part of her ached from the cold, her limbs stiffening as though slowly turning to stone. Elias rubbed her arms briskly, trying to warm her, though his own hands were trembling from cold and residual fear. For several minutes, neither spoke. The basement was filled with the relentless drip of water, the groan of unstable beams, and the slow, steady rush of the broken pipe continuing its merciless flood. Isla's head rested against Elias's shoulder, barely supported by her own strength. Her voice came out thin, nearly lost to the dark expanse around them. "Elias, what if no one finds us in time?" He tightened his arms around her gently, but with an edge of desperation. "They will. Someone will notice the power failure upstairs or the alarms." Isla let out a small exhale that trembled with doubt. Her fingers curled weakly into the fabric of his shirt, trying to anchor herself to something real, something warm, something safe. The cold had a voice now whispering through her bloodstream, urging her to sleep, to give in. But she forced her eyes open, staring at the faint red glow reflecting off the water. Elias sensed her fading and pressed his forehead lightly against her temple, grounding her. "Isla, stay awake. Look at the light. Focus on anything that keeps you here." She nodded, but her eyelids drooped again, heavy with exhaustion. Elias lifted her chin gently, his thumb brushing the edge of her jaw. Isla, I need you to stay alert. Tell me something. She swallowed with difficulty. My head feels heavy. You need warmth, he said, urgent but steady. We have to find a way out of this room. He scanned the dim space around them, his gaze darting between stacked crates, half-submerged machinery, and the shadowed walls. Something in the far corner caught his attention. A shelving unit larger than the others, its upper racks still intact, and behind it, part of the wall looked slightly different, darker, smoother, like a panel or a hidden structure left over from an old architectural design. Elias narrowed his eyes. That was not there during the renovation. Isla followed his gaze sluggishly. What is it? He shifted her gently, setting her against the wall of the platform so he could move. Stay there, he instructed, though his voice gentled at the end. I will check. She nodded barely, keeping her head upright. Elias lowered himself carefully into the water again, suppressing the shock of the cold with a sharp inhale. The icy liquid hit his waist, flooding him with the same bone-deep shiver Isla had been battling for the past hour. But he moved through it, forcing his body to obey. The shelf he aimed for was partially blocked by floating debris. He shoved aside a fallen toolbox and waded deeper until he reached the metal racks. The structure was old, its bolts rusted, but not enough to compromise it. Elias gripped the edge and pulled himself upward until he could peer behind it. His breath caught. There in the wall was the outline of a ventilation shaft door long forgotten and partially obscured by years of storage. The frame was dusty but intact. If he could open it, they might be able to access the ventilation crawlspace. It would not lead them straight out, but it would offer a higher, safer area and maybe a path toward another section of the mansion. He reached for the handle, but it was stuck locked in place by a heavy crate wedged against it. Elias braced himself and shoved the crate with all his strength, gritting his teeth as the metal screeched across the floor, inch by inch. Behind him, Isla stirred at the noise, lifting her head weakly. Elias, are you all right? He did not answer until the crate finally slid free, sending a loud clang, echoing through the basement. Yes, stay there, do not move. He tugged on the handle again, and this time the metal door groaned open, revealing a narrow shaft. Cold air rushed out, but it was drier than the basement air, promising a safer space beyond. Elias allowed himself one breath of hope before returning to Isla. When he reached the platform, she looked even paler, the tremors in her limbs softer, no longer frantic, but dangerously slow. That terrified him more than the shaking. Isla. He cupped her face gently, her skin cold beneath his fingers. Stay with me. Look at me. She blinked slowly, her eyes glassy. Did you find something? Yes, a way up, but you need to stand. Can you? Isla tried to push herself upright, but her arms barely responded. Her legs trembled under the blanket, refusing to bear weight. A small, choked sound escaped her lips, equal parts frustration and fear. I cannot, she whispered. I am sorry. Elias shook his head fiercely. Do not apologize. I am here. He slid one arm beneath her knees and the other behind her back, lifting her into his arms with a strength fueled more by desperation than muscle. Isla let out a startled inhale, her arms instinctively wrapping around his neck. He stepped into the water again, wading toward the ventilation shaft door. The cold surged over him, but he ignored it, focusing entirely on the woman shivering against his body. The metal beneath his feet shifted slightly, under the growing pressure of the flood, but he moved carefully but quickly. When he reached the shaft, he maneuvered Isla to sit gently on the lowest edge, pulling her closer to the dry interior. She gripped the metal with shaking hands, struggling to hold on. Elias climbed up beside her, bracing himself against the frame. "We need to go in one at a time," he said. "The shaft structure is narrow." Isla nodded, but her body swayed, and Elias steadied her instantly. Her head rested briefly against his shoulder. "Elias, I cannot feel my fingers." Fear punched through his chest, sharp and merciless. "Then feel my voice," he murmured, leaning closer. "Feel my hands. Stay awake." Isla forced her eyes open, meeting his stare. He held her gaze, unwavering, determined, refusing to let her slip, even a fraction into the numbness stealing up her limbs. He shifted her carefully and prepared to climb in behind her, when another crack thundered through the basement. This time it was the old overhead beam, shifting under pressure, water slamming against it. Isla let out a small gasp. The room felt like it was falling apart around them. And yet, in the chaos, in the fear, in the rising flood, Elias saw it, a thin sliver of brightness, slicing through the top corner of the shaft. A crack of light, real light, not artificial, not electrical. Daylight. Isla saw it too, her breath catching. "Is that—" "Yes," Elias whispered, hope threading through his voice for the first time since the basement collapsed. "It is the way out. But we have to move now." The water surged again below them, and the cold clawed at their bones. Isla tightened her grip on the frame. Elias positioned himself to lift her into the narrow shaft, and together, clinging to that thin, fragile crack of light, they prepared to climb toward the world above, toward air, toward warmth, toward survival. Elias braced his hand against the metal frame of the ventilation shaft and lifted Isla upward, guiding her through the narrow opening toward the pale sliver of daylight leaking from above. The shaft was just wide enough for her to crawl, and he felt every trembling motion she made as she dragged herself forward, legs sluggish from the cold. The air inside was different, drier, less hostile, carrying a faint metallic tang from years of disuse. Elias followed behind her, pushing himself through the tight space, his shoulders brushing the cramped walls. Each movement sent a fresh sting of cold through his body, but he kept going inch by inch, refusing to let the floodwaters below claim them both. Isla let out a small broken breath as she neared the top, where the sliver of light widened into a jagged opening created by shifting debris from the tremors. The sound of distant voices filtered faintly through it, muffled but unmistakably human. Her heart lurched. "Elias, I hear people." He felt hope surge sharply in his chest, pushing him to move faster. "Good, keep going. You are almost there." Isla pushed herself toward the opening, her hands scraping against the rough edges, but she forced her body through the last stretch until she emerged onto solid ground. Cold daylight washed over her like a blessing. She collapsed onto her side, gasping, her lungs flooding with fresh air. Elias crawled up behind her moments later, dragging himself through the broken opening until he tumbled onto the ground beside her. The sudden warmth of sunlight hit his face, and he exhaled hard, the relief fierce and overwhelming. Above them, the world was no longer silent. Footsteps pounded across gravel. Radios crackled with static. Voices shouted orders. Someone gasped loudly. "Over here, 2 people, they are alive." Isla tried to sit up, but her strength failed, and she sagged back against the ground. Elias reached for her, instinctively propping her against his chest as a team of security staff sprinted toward them. The first guard dropped to his knees, immediately checking Isla's pulse, and then Elias's. "They are both in hypothermic shock," he said urgently. "Get blankets now." Another guard barked into his radio, requesting medical support, and then pulled out a silver emergency blanket, wrapping it around Isla first. The foil crackled loudly as it touched her skin. Elias watched her carefully, his hand still resting against her shoulder. She shivered uncontrollably beneath the emergency wrap, but her eyes were open alert, the glassy haze fading. He brushed a strand of wet hair from her cheek, his voice rough. "You are safe." Isla nodded weakly, trying to speak, but her voice cracked. "You too." Before he could respond, more people arrived, paramedics pushing through with equipment bags and stretchers. Elias was quickly evaluated, but Isla drew the most immediate attention. Her body temperature was dangerously low, and the paramedics moved quickly to transfer her onto a stretcher, wrapping additional blankets around her. Elias stayed beside her as long as he could, but when they attempted to separate him for his own medical check, he resisted for a moment, his eyes locked on hers. "Do not leave yet," she whispered, voice faint. "I will not," he answered before the paramedics gently guided him aside. As they checked his vitals, another voice pierced the air, sharp with disbelief. "Cameras incoming." Elias stiffened, turning his head in time to see two drones hovering over the estate fence, their red recording lights blinking. Beyond the gates, paparazzi had already begun, gathering shouting questions and snapping photos through long telephoto lenses. News vans screeched to a stop outside the stone perimeter. A guard cursed softly. "Damn it, someone leaked the power outage." Elias surged to his feet, ignoring the paramedics' protests. His eyes locked instantly on Isla, still lying on the stretcher, her skin pale beneath the emergency blankets, her lashes fluttering with exhaustion. Without hesitation, he crossed the short distance to her and stepped directly between her and the flashing cameras, positioning his tall frame as a shield. The drone lights flickered across his back, but Isla was safely hidden from view, her face buried in the blankets. Elias glared at the hovering cameras, his voice cold and sharp. "Turn those off now." The drones did not move. They continued recording, capturing every moment with ruthless precision. A security guard finally launched a signal jammer, forcing the drones to drop into emergency hover mode before retreating. More guards formed a protective circle around Isla, blocking all possible camera angles. Elias stayed planted in front of her, unwavering, as the paramedics lifted her stretcher and began carrying her toward the waiting medical truck. He walked beside them, his pace matching theirs step for step. Isla's eyes opened just enough to meet his, and she whispered softly, "Thank you for protecting me." He leaned slightly closer, his voice low enough for her alone. "You protected me, too." They reached the vehicle, and the paramedics moved quickly, loading her safely inside. Elias tried to step in after her, but one medic held up a hand. "Sir, please, you need to be checked as well." He hesitated, torn between logic and the fierce instinct to stay with her. Isla lifted her hand weakly from beneath the blanket, and he caught it for a brief moment, her cold fingers curling around his. "I will see you soon," he promised, squeezing gently. She nodded once before the medic guided him toward another ambulance. As the doors closed behind them, the world outside erupted with noise, voices, questions, camera shutters, car engines, and security commands, blending into one overwhelming rush. But through it all, Elias kept his focus steady, thawed not by the sunlight, but by the fragile connection formed in the basement below the ground. And as the medical trucks pulled away from the mansion, he understood with startling clarity that whatever had begun in that dark flooded space was not ending here in the open air. It was only just beginning. The world outside the hospital windows moved quickly, cars rushing by street lights flickering on as dusk settled over the city. But inside Isla Bennett's small recovery room, everything felt slow muted, softened by the quiet hum of machines and the faint lavender scent drifting from a diffuser a nurse had left behind. She lay propped against thin pillows wrapped in warm blankets, her skin finally flushed with returning heat instead of the blue-tinged cold that had frightened everyone hours earlier. Her body still ached. Her hands still tingled from the numbness retreating, but she was awake, present, alive. And yet her gaze kept drifting to the door as if she were expecting a shadow to appear there at any second. Elias Mercer had not come. Not yet. She told herself she understood. The media frenzy outside the mansion had exploded into a full-blown spectacle by morning. Helicopters had hovered overhead. News sites ran headlines speculating everything from a secret affair to a cover-up inside Mercer Financial. Security threats to the property had increased, and Elias, well, he was a billionaire with a company to run a reputation, to manage a life lived under magnifying glass scrutiny. She was a maid. The world did not arrange itself so neatly that someone like him would walk back into the life of someone like her. Still, her eyes never left the door. A knock finally sounded, soft, hesitant, almost uncharacteristic for someone as powerful as the man who stepped in. Elias entered quietly, closing the door behind him with a gentle click, as though afraid the sound might break her. He stood there for a moment, simply looking at her, the tension in his shoulders shifting into something softer, something relieved. Isla's breath caught. He looked different in the sterile hospital lighting calm, but in a shaken way, like someone who had spent hours wrestling fear into silence. His clothes were different, too clean and dry now, but his eyes were the same, shadowed and sincere. Isla straightened slightly. "Sir, you did not have to come." Elias exhaled once a sound, somewhere between disbelief and reproach. "Isla, I should have been here sooner. There was too much noise outside, and the security team wanted me to wait until it was safe." Isla nodded, though something in her chest tightened. "You have a lot to handle." He stepped closer, his movements slow, as if approaching something fragile. "None of it mattered more than this," he said quietly. "More than making sure you were all right." The admission hit her like a warm wave. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words tangled in her throat. Elias reached the side of her bed, then hesitated for a moment before pulling something from his pocket. It glinted faintly in the dim light, the silver charm she had worn around her neck since childhood. Her necklace! Isla gasped softly, instinctively touching her bare collarbone. "I thought I lost it in the water." "You did," Elias said, "but I found it in the debris before the paramedics moved us." He took her hand gently, turning her palm upward, and placed the necklace inside. Their fingers brushed the contact, soft, warm, steady, and Isla felt her breath hitch again. "Thank you," she whispered, voice trembling. "You did not have to look for it." "I did," he answered simply, "because I knew what it meant to you." Silence filled the room, but not heavy silence. Tender silence simmering with things neither of them had dared say before. Isla curled her fingers around the charmed tears blurring her vision. She sniffed quickly, embarrassed. "I am sorry," she murmured. "I am just tired. "You do not need to apologize for feeling," he replied softly. It was strange seeing him like this, unarmored, unguarded, stripped of the polished control the world knew him for. Isla studied him quietly. He shifted his weight, his eyes drifting for a moment to the floor. "In the basement," he said, voice low, "you saved me more than I saved you." She blinked. "That is not true." "It is," he insisted gently. "I would not have held myself together without you. You pulled me out of the past. You brought me back." A warmth that had nothing to do with her recovery crept through her chest. She wanted to tell him he had done the same for her, pulled her from a darkness she had carried since her mother died. But emotion thickened in her throat. She looked down, fingertips tracing the charm. "You did not have to come find me," she whispered. "Not after everything, not with the press." Elias stepped closer until the edge of the bed brushed his leg. He lowered his voice until only she could hear. "Isla, I came because I wanted to. Because I had to. Because leaving without seeing you again felt wrong." Her breath caught. The room felt too small, suddenly, too quiet, too filled with everything they had not said in that basement. Outside the window, a siren wailed faintly, passing into distance. Inside, Elias reached out slowly, his fingertips brushing hers, resting over the necklace again. When she looked up at him, his eyes held something fragile, something raw, something hopeful. "Our worlds are different," he said quietly. "Complicated, messy. But when I walked out of that basement, I realized I did not want those worlds to separate again." Isla's heart trembled at his words. She whispered, barely audible, "Neither do I." The door clicked softly as the hallway lights dimmed, signaling visiting hours were ending. Neither of them moved. Neither wanted to break whatever delicate truth had just settled between them. Isla squeezed his hand gently and whispered, "You found me down there." Elias's voice dropped to a near whisper. "I am not done finding you." Sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the Mercer Foundation's community campus, soft and warm in a way that made Isla pause every time she walked through the entrance. A month had passed since the night she and Elias were trapped in the basement, and life had taken on a different shape, a gentler one, a quieter one. She now wore a Navy training uniform with a small badge that read Mercer Foundation Hospitality Program, a symbol of opportunity she never thought would come her way. Today was her first official day in the program. Isla stood in the lobby, clutching her notebook, heart fluttering with the nervous excitement of someone stepping into a world she had only seen from the outside. She looked at her reflection in the polished glass panel and saw someone new, someone trying, someone hopeful. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, took a breath, and walked toward the classroom wing. But before she reached the hallway, a familiar voice spoke from behind her. "You walk like someone who is trying to pretend they are not nervous." Isla froze for a split second, then turned slowly, already smiling. Elias stood near the entrance, hands in his pockets, wearing a simple dark sweater and slacks, looking more like a man at ease than a billionaire, appearing unexpectedly in the middle of a non-profit building he owned. "You are not supposed to be here," she said, though her smile grew. "You have meetings, probably important ones." He shrugged lightly as he walked toward her. "I rescheduled." Isla blinked. "You rescheduled billionaire meetings?" "Yes, to be here." Her heart warmed in that slow, blooming way. She was still learning to understand. He stopped in front of her, close, but not too close, respecting her space, yet still fully there, fully present in the way he had been ever since that night. "How are you feeling about today?" he asked, excited, nervous, terrified. "Hopeful, every possible emotion mixed together," she admitted. Elias's voice softened. "That sounds like someone who is doing something brave." She looked down, fingertips brushing the silver charm of her necklace, now cleaned, polished, and resting where it belonged. "It still feels strange," she whispered. "Being here, being seen, being given chances instead of just surviving." "You earned this," he said. "You fought for it every step of the way. Do not ever forget that." Isla swallowed emotion tightening in her chest. Because she was used to being invisible, used to blending into the corners of wealthy homes. But with Elias, she never felt unseen. She felt exactly who she was not, less not more simply herself. He reached into a small paper bag he was carrying and held it out. "Here, something for you." She raised a brow. "For what? For your first day?" She hesitated, then slowly opened the bag. Inside lay a neatly folded piece of fabric, a faded deep gray blanket, the same one they had shared in the basement. Isla gasped a soft, stunned sound. "You kept it. You cleaned it," he said with a faint smile. "But I kept it because it mattered, because it was part of something that changed me too." Isla touched the blanket with careful fingertips, feeling the familiar worn texture, the quiet history it held. "Why give it to me?" Elias met her eyes, his voice steady, warm, open. "Because you should have something that reminds you not of the cold, but of what came after." Isla breathed in, slow, a warmth rising beneath her ribs, something quiet and steady and new. "Thank you," she whispered, "truly." He stepped just a little closer, not touching her but close enough that she felt the intention, the meaning, the space between their worlds shrinking day by day. "Isla Bennett," he said softly, "I hope you know that whatever you build from here, wherever you go, I will be proud of you." Her breath trembled. "And I will be grateful for you," she replied. "For everything." They stood there for a long moment, sunlight pooling around them, turning the lobby into something golden, something suspended, something gentle. For once, it did not feel like billionaire and maid or mansion and basement or two worlds divided by lines society drew and redrew. It felt like two people who had found warmth in a cold place and carried it with them into the light. Finally, Elias nodded toward the hallway. "Go on, your future is waiting." Isla hugged the folded blanket to her chest, feeling its weight, its comfort, its memories. She smiled at him one last time before stepping toward the classroom wing, each step lighter than the last. As the door closed softly behind her, Elias remained standing in the sunlight, watching her with the quiet certainty of someone who knew he would follow wherever her warmth led him. If you made it this far into the story, then your heart felt something in these two people. In the cold and the dark, learning to breathe again, learning to trust again, learning that warmth can come from places we never expect. Stories like this do not just live in basements or in mansions, or in the quiet space between two trembling hands reaching for each other. They live in us, in the moments we choose compassion when the world chooses indifference, in the moments we say, "I am here," even when fear tells us to run, in the moments light leaks into the smallest crack of darkness, and suddenly survival becomes connection. If this story touched you even for a second, I want to invite you to stay a little longer with us. Like, share, subscribe. Not because the algorithm demands it, not because numbers matter more than hearts, but because every time you engage with a story like this, You help push a little more warmth back into a world that can feel so unbearably cold. Your support is what allows these stories to reach someone who might be sitting alone tonight, needing a reminder that kindness still exists, that redemption is still possible, that two strangers can become lifelines in the unlikeliest moments. If you felt your chest tighten when the water rose, or when Isla whispered for warmth, or when Elias faced the ghosts he had buried for years, then you already know this channel is more than just storytelling. It is a place for the people who believe in second chances, who believe love can bloom in broken places, who believe that no one is too lost to be found. I want to hear from you. Tell me where in the world you are watching from. Tell me which moment in the story hit you the hardest. Was it the basement flooding, Elias's flashback, Isla clutching her mother's necklace, or the moment he shielded her from the cameras without hesitation? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your words matter here. They shape the stories we tell next. They help us build a community of people who feel deeply, love deeply, hope deeply. And if you know someone who needs to believe in warmth again, someone who is fighting a silent battle, someone who feels trapped in their own dark basement, send them this story. Maybe it will be the light they need, the crack of daylight that reminds them they are not alone. And if you want more stories like this, more tales of unexpected tenderness, more narratives where love grows, not from perfection, but from vulnerability, subscribe and turn on notifications. We post new stories often, stories of resilience, of soft moments in hard places, of people learning to see each other beyond status or fear or past mistakes. Your support keeps this channel alive. It keeps these stories reaching hearts all around the world. Before you go, I want to leave you with one question, the same one the story asked you at the very beginning. Would you help a stranger in the dark? And if you would, what kind of world could we create if more people answered yes? Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for feeling. This is not the end of our story. It is just the beginning.